These look like two separate lives. On one side, a patient swallows a useless sugar pill in a clinic, and their chronic physical pain vanishes. On the other, a person walks away from a stable career to face the brunt of the unknown in a remote jungle. We usually credit these moments to a specific personality or a conscious act of free will. But looking at the neural activity behind them suggests a different driver. Both of these extremes are fueled by the same internal requirement: the brain's need to regulate its dopamine baseline. Our culture views deep faith as mystical and chronic restlessness as a lack of discipline. In the lab, however, we see these as hardwired chemical scripts executing a specific biological function. This shifts our understanding of identity. We aren't just making abstract choices. We are observing a highly optimized biological algorithm navigating its environment. To see this algorithm in action, we have to look at how deep belief, whether in a medical treatment or a higher power, functions as a literal physiological command. This is the process of top-down expectation. When the prefrontal cortex deems a situation profoundly meaningful, it actively filters incoming sensory data before you even become aware of it. This expectation floods the system with endogenous opioids and dopamine. These particles physically bind to receptors, cooling a hyperactive pain pathway until the signal itself changes. These chemicals are not psychological fabrications, they are measurable. In fact, if you inject an opioid antagonist, a drug that blocks these natural chemicals, the placebo effect disappears instantly. This same prefrontal network reaches into the amygdala. It suppresses the brain's threat detector, effectively muting the biological loops that drive fear and anxiety. The clinical data reflects this structural shielding. Active spiritual practitioners show a 25% lower baseline for chronic anxiety and a 40% reduction in depressive symptoms compared to the general population. This pathway can even influence fundamental cellular behavior. By stabilizing the prefrontal amygdala circuit, the brain suppresses cortisol spikes and alters receptor sensitivity on cell membranes to enhance immunity. In this context, belief functions as a mechanism for biological resilience. But on the right, the 7R receptor is less efficient. The molecule often fails to bind. This makes the brain effectively dopamine blind to normal, low-level stimuli. For 7R carriers, a quiet, predictable life doesn't feel safe. It feels like a deficit. To reach a normal baseline of satisfaction, they are biologically compelled to seek massive sensory volume through high-risk environments and constant geographical travel. Historically, this was a massive asset. Research shows that 7R frequencies increase in direct proportion to a population's migration distance from Africa. It was the genetic engine that drove explorers to the edge of the map. In a modern, sedentary world, this ancient script becomes a liability. A 7R carrier in a repetitive 9-to-5 job can experience a predictable routine as a form of physical confinement. This stands in direct contrast to the remaining 60% of people. Because their receptors are highly efficient, their brains can process localized stability and familiar routines as a state of equilibrium. Chronic wanderlust isn't a lack of focus, it is a starvation response. It's an ancient script demanding external friction to keep the dopamine system from bottoming out. When we look at the spiritual practitioner and the global wanderer together, we see two different ways of solving the same problem: managing a neurochemical baseline. For those seeking internal stability, you can utilize Pavlovian triggers to engage the placebo circuit. By creating intentional micro-rituals before high-stress tasks, you can train your prefrontal cortex to release dopamine on command. You can also use cognitive reappraisal. By consciously reframing a threat into a structured problem-solving challenge, you force the prefrontal cortex to intervene, shielding your immune system from toxic cortisol spikes. If you are a 7R carrier, the strategy is different. Stop resisting the restlessness. Instead, build a life that accommodates your need for novelty. You can microdose this friction by rotating your work environments or taking up complex, high-stakes hobbies. This feeds the blunted receptors the high sensory volume they require without causing total life instability. We are biological masterpieces governed by specific genetic scripts. Once you identify the mechanics of your own internal engine, you gain the ability to navigate it with precision.